Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School pregame show with the first ever in-season NBA tournament game taking place on Friday night. And for those in the New York City area, join us in Midtown at Penn 6 at 7 o'clock for our KFS watch party. More on that in the details of this episode. Joining me to preview this matchup between the New York Knicks and the new look Milwaukee Bucks. Good friend of the pod from the Eurostep podcast, Mr. Ti Windisch. Ti, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. I figured when we booked this, I'd be more excited to talk about Bucks basketball, but hey, here I am, still very excited about the in-season tournament, but now just nervous. There's only 4 seeding games. I need the Bucks to get off on the right foot here, which they have not done in half of their games so far this season.
Brother, you think you have had a bad time watching basketball. I have a basketball team whose best player, I don't even know what Julius Randle is at this point, is off to a horrendous start, shooting under 30% from the field. That's been a great formula for Bucks opponents so far. Atlanta was doomed. They're hot now. Toronto was doomed. I think they're probably going to rip off 10 straight wins based on what I saw. So I think we have a stoppable force meeting a movable object in New York this Friday. Maybe that's the formula. Maybe that was the medicine the Knicks needed to go into Milwaukee, a team that every Knicks fan is afraid of. And this 2-5 start that's staring them in the face. The Knicks are 2-3 to start. They'll play Milwaukee on Friday, and then their schedule lightens up, and they play James Harden and the new look Clippers on Monday. So we'll see what happens there. But I want to wait. We'll talk about basketball in just a second because your team had a busy offseason, and more specifically, you had a busy offseason. So the last time you were here, you were gracious enough to join us because Giannis was on a press tour, basically saying, "I'll leave if they don't do something." And you came on our show because he mentioned the Knicks. And of course, the Knicks are mentioned in every single star that is potentially going to leave their team. And you came on, you talked about the potential of like what might happen. And you thought he would stay, but you were open to the conversation that he could leave if something doesn't happen. Then you were getting married days later. And then something happened that, I mean, our listeners know this. You know this as well. I got married this summer too. And my biggest fear was that the Knicks were going to do something either the night of my wedding or on my honeymoon. And my biggest fear happened on your honeymoon when the Milwaukee Bucks traded for Dame Lillard. So if you could tell the Knicks Film School audience your experience, what it was like when I don't even know where you went on your honeymoon.
New England.
You were even in the States for it, but you were on your honeymoon, and then suddenly the alert goes off that the Bucks get Dame Lillard.
So the funny thing, and this is a true story, we rented a car, flew to Boston, then rented a car and hit New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine. Mm-hmm. So probably the longest day of driving we had. We were almost we're going to Bar Harbor in Maine, kind of cool, going to Acadia National Park, all these things. It's a great trip. Loved it. I am driving the final stretch here to Bar Harbor. It's like this long single lane road. We're like in this traffic. It's like kind of narrow. I was like, whatever, almost there. Can't wait to get there. Ready to, from Wisconsin, ready to get there and crack open a beer, to be honest. And my wife goes, "Oh, the Bucks traded for Damian Lillard." Not exactly knowing how important that was. And I'm like, "No, they didn't. Like that's a Photoshop. They didn't do that." And I'm like having her read off, like, "What's the Twitter at? Is it W0J or is it actually Woj?" And then she like looks somewhere else. She's like, "No, this news article, it really happened." And I'm just like screaming. I'm like, "No way. They did it. I thought they'd try. I didn't think they'd do it." I'm having her draft tweets from my account. And then that night, instead of doing a full podcast, because it was still mid honeymoon, I just recorded like a 2-minute video in full honeymoon mode. Apparently people thought my shorts were a little short. They thought I was showing off a little much thigh. I said, that's how I rock on a honeymoon when it's 70 degrees out. But it was awesome. It was very funny how it came together. And I'm very glad I have a very understanding, new wife who was okay with me spending a bit of time on Twitter that evening during the honeymoon.
Yeah, shout out to Ty's wife for being understanding. I know for
Mrs. Eurostep is the title she's given herself.
So shout out to Mrs. Eurostep for being understanding. I can tell you right now, Mrs. GMAC would not have been as understanding if the Knicks had pulled off some type of deal and we were in Aruba, and I'm suddenly producing an emergency live stream. So shout out to the partners in crime that we have in this content.
For like 2 minutes, I was like, do I try and join the pod on my phone or on the iPad I had? And I was like, no, there's got to be a line. So, we'll have plenty of time to talk about this later. And I'm glad I made that decision.
I'm glad that someone else has also gone through the experience of like when you're the driver of a long road trip, like when we head out east in Long Island where I'm from, and I know something might happen that I need to react. That getting your co-pilot to draft a tweet and send it is so clutch. And so shout out to the wives of all the basketball fans and the husbands of the world that are co-pilots in all of this. So the Dame Lillard experience so far, the Bucks are 2-2, and I got to be honest, I'm coming in a little bit blind because the only time that the Bucks have not played and the Knicks have also not played, or the Bucks have played and the Knicks haven't, is opening night for the Bucks, the Thursday game, and Dame looked amazing. And since then, the Bucks are 1-2, and you mentioned some concerns. So, what are your biggest concerns so far? And if you can, the follow up is then going to be, what are Bucks fans' biggest concerns so far through 4 games?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is the way they've played defensively. I think, we knew Griffin coming from Toronto, Adrian Griffin, the Bucks' new head coach, Dr. Coach Adrian Griffin, officially, wanted to be more aggressive and trap, and they've done that. I think I don't think they need to make as many tweaks as it might seem. I believe technically they're 30th in defense. So they gave up big runs.
29th, because last night the Pacers gave up 100,000 points to the Boston Celtics. But you're right.
They did lose by 50. They did lose by 50. I did see that.
Shout out Obi Toppin.
Yeah, which is not great, of course, for a Milwaukee team with, last year's reigning DPOY runner-up and Giannis, who's won the award, to even with some shaky perimeter defense, we think they can be a middling defense, and that's okay. They can't be 29th or 30th or anywhere close to that. I think they're just using Brook the wrong way. I think they've got him too far away from the basket. I think they still, funny enough, they're still giving up the least shots at the rim, which tells you that something is kind of working, but they're giving up the worst percentage on those shots. So like when the cracks are there, they're big enough that it's kind of a disaster. And then I really think the 3-point defense, they're losing some rotations. I also think though teams are getting these hot starts because Brook is trying to trap away from the basket and the help isn't getting under the basket and teams are just scoring at the rim. And we all know when a team is scoring kind of with impunity down low, the threes often follow. And I think that's kind of been the case for their 3-point defense. I think they need to be a little better at rotating, but I think it's kind of a cascading effect. And then I'd say Bucks fans' biggest concerns is Dame not being used enough offensively. I think part of this is probably, like we saw how the Philly game ended. You saw that game. Dame was used enough offensively in that game. I think there's a little bit of trying to ease him in / spare him for what Bucks fans consider the real season that starts in late April, but they do need to use him more, and they're not utilizing the Giannis Dame combinations enough. I think part of it is, and I've been surprised by this, maybe it's taken them aback too. I mean, teams trap Dame so aggressively, like every time before he even gets going in games, like in a way that I didn't really expect it with Giannis out there. So I think they just need to work on their counters to that, but I think they go away from it, have him off ball a little too much, even though he hasn't had a great start outside of the end to the Philly game. I think they need to work him and the Giannis actions in more frequently. I think I saw they've done like 40 or 20 to 40 through 4 games. And I think it's actually closer to 20 or 30. I think they should probably be doing that like at least 10 times a game. And people are really mad that they stagger them. I don't care about that. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a superstar out there for most of the game. But even in the minutes together, they should be running at least 10 actions, not 5 actions per game.
That's interesting that people are mad that they stagger them. I feel like that the common thing when you have 2 all-star or even all-NBA caliber players that fans usually clamor for is, why don't we stagger? Why like Sixers fans used to do this all the time last year, where it was like, why are Harden and Embiid off the floor? This is how other teams are getting back in the game.
I think it's more that they want them on the floor to maximize their time together, just because I think we all know, at the end of the day, the Dame Giannis stuff being totally unguardable is the path to a championship now, realistically. I mean, I still think they can make some defensive adjustments and defend other contenders mildly well, especially I just kind of bake in they're going to get a defensive wing player at some point because that's what Horst does. John Horst, Bucks GM, does pretty much every deadline, although some of these kids look intriguing too. So hopefully maybe one of them could step up and play some more as well. But I think it's more about just not maximizing the Dame. But that's my thing. And I agree with you. I would rather stagger them and get used to doing that. I think if they play 20 minutes a game together, they can still easily run 10 to 15 Dame Giannis actions in those minutes without a problem. So I think it's more just better utilizing that time. And I agree. I think staggering them is the way to go to be a more consistent team. But you can tell, I mean, you're pulling in Giannis, who has been in this drop defenses and the Bucks offense for a long time. Dame, who has been, whatever on defense and this very pick and roll centric offense the whole time. And then Griffin, who did this weird motion offense thing with Toronto. And of course the aggressive defense. And it's bringing together 3 different ideals versus I think most teams have 2 to worry about at most. I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. I do think they're going to figure it out. Griffin, for all the faults that Bucks fans have seen and that have been on display fairly, he's not been immalleable. They've run like the 4 different kinds of coverage I'd say you're going to see, not equally, but we've seen all of them at least a little bit in just 4 games. So I do think, there's going to be adjustments. I think they just have to tweak their base a bit, but I like the versatility that we've seen. And I think come playoff time, there's still a good chance that they're better off for dealing with different teams than they were under Bud.
So you don't think they're going to finish 29th in defense or 28th? I sure hope going to clean in the glass. Okay. Which
I sure hope not.
It's a tough part about these 4 to 5 game evaluations at the beginning of the year. You don't know how seriously teams took the preseason. Is this first 10 game stretch really more of a preseason? I think that's why that's the balancing act that at least I'm doing with some of the Knicks early struggles that's included with Julius Randle and then the start he's off to. But I have high projections for the Bucks. I mean, I picked the Celtics to win to be the 1 seed, but I certainly think it's going to be the Bucks or the Celtics, which brings me to my next question, because right after the Dame trade happened, the Celtics then made a trade for a former Buck in Jrue Holiday. And if I can ask you about the layout of the Eastern Conference, because the Knicks will get a firsthand look at the Bucks. We'll see some of the issues or strengths that they have on Friday. As far as projecting out the rest of the season, what were your thoughts when the Celtics then trade for Jrue Holiday and the potential matchup that could potentially create at the end of the season between, these 2 teams that have met in the playoffs recently?
Yeah, I thought the Celtics would get off to a slightly slower start, so that was an L of a take from me. They've obviously been blitzing teams. I mean, I think the schedule hasn't been super tough, but still they've looked great. So certainly have to tip the cap there. I still think their biggest regular season challenge will just be health and availability, because I think you look at like their bench scoring and really, even including Horford, who is looked at as one of the top 6, just not a volume scorer in a lot of these games anymore. Their top 5 has had to carry a lot, which is fine. I mean, their top 5 is clearly awesome. It's probably the best of, any 5-player groupings you'll see around the NBA, just in terms of the talent from 1 through 5. I still think the playoffs could get a little interesting given the way some of those guys have shot, specifically in the playoffs. I mean, the Jays and Jrue have not been super effective 3-point shooters in playoff settings. Certainly Jrue hasn't. But right now, I mean, they're a matchup nightmare for teams. They're a problem. So with the way the Cavs have started, they probably will, finish first, assuming like the Pistons or whatever aren't actually a juggernaut or, some of these early season results we've seen around the league so far. I think playoff wise though, I still like Milwaukee's chances, even though they look like they're a mess right now. I think they do need to solidify another defender in the rotation, whether that can be a Marjon Beauchamp or if they have to go get someone. I think either way, one more kind of 2-3 sort of defender to help with those wings, along with, Chris looks a little better. He's still coming along. He's still on a minutes restriction at the moment, but Crowder's defended well. Of course, you have Giannis you can put on the perimeter. They did that with Jimmy Butler. It worked really well after infamously they didn't in the playoffs last year. So I think we're going to see more of that throughout the season as well. But one more defender you really feel good about, just so you can defend. I think the Bucks Celtics matchup is going to come down to, they need to just be so good offensively and just make the Jays settle for like mid-range shots. I think they can do it. I think they've done it before. I mean, the fact that series went 7 with no Chris Middleton tells me they had somebody. Of course, they had the benefit of Jrue Holiday, in that series, and now he's on the other team. But I do think that you just need to make those guys kind of shoot over defenders. And even if their looks are kind of open, if the Dame Giannis and then Chris spacing off of it actions are just otherworldly on the other end, you can live with that. I still think that's a solid formula, but they are going to have to, solidify that other defensive player in the rotation and, go from 11th to like second in offense and really be completely unguardable when Dame and Giannis are out there, which so far has not been the case. But thankfully, it's November 2nd.
So, yes, a reminder to every overreacting basketball fan, it is November 2nd, but there's still like expectations on this season. And it's funny being in the Knicks position, or Knicks fans position of, I think the reason the regular season start has been so frustrating is because deep down we understand the regular season is what we're here to enjoy, and the playoffs have different expectations.
You enjoyed the playoffs more than the Bucks did last year. We did.
That is very true. They made it further than the Bucks last year. However, other than shout out Bobby Marks, I don't think the Knicks will make the finals. I'd love it if they made the finals.
Did he say that?
That's his pick to make the finals. The Knicks will. And God bless him. I welcome on the pod anytime, Bobby Marks. He might have just been doing TV, but I recognize. Listen, he's got to take out there, and we're talking about it. It worked.
It did.
Point being, though, for a team that has those type of postseason expectations and has for a few years now, I've asked this to everybody so far on these pregame pods. What does a disappointing season look like? And obviously not winning the title is a disappointing season. So my question is, what happens if the disappointing season happens? What happens if they don't win the title, do you think?
I think there's always going to be some role player movement. I think there is a possibility if things go poorly like they've been going. And I think the thing for the Bucks, I think they can not win the title and bring back largely the same team. We've seen them do that before from like 22 to 23. And honestly, even, pre-Dame trade, I think they were going to do the same thing again. Like I think they felt good about the group with Jrue and Grayson, but Dame became clearly available for the cost of 1 pick, 2 swaps, and Jrue, and they just kind of felt like they had to do it, which I still think is the right move. We're already seeing some, should they have just kept Bud and Jrue? And it's like, they probably win 60 games or something. Is that the goal? I don't think that's the goal that anyone really cares about, to be honest. But I think it's about, do they lose because, the Celtics top 5 are incredible and they all shoot 45% from 3 and they defend really well and they take down Milwaukee in 6 or 7? Or do they lose because there's some clear deficiency? Like they still just can't defend at the level they should be able to, even with some clear limitations, or the Dame Giannis pairing is just not being utilized effectively enough. I think there's a lot of pressure on Adrian Griffin, right? Like I think there's one and done potential if this whole season and playoffs, they continue to have these glaring issues and they don't play up to their potential. There's tremendous amount of pressure on everyone, frankly. That's where you're at when you have Giannis and Dame on the roster and the luxury tax bill is what it is and everything else. So I think that's, I don't think it's like, oh, they don't win the finals, so you trade Chris, you trade Brooke automatically. I think it all depends how it happens. Like I think we all felt bad in 22 when they lost to Boston, but it was kind of like they went to the finals, they pushed Golden State and didn't have one of our good players due to injury, one of our best players due to injury. Whereas last year it was like, okay, things need to change. You can't lose like that. You just can't. And I'm glad that things changed. And, hopefully we don't have a playoffs like that in Milwaukee for quite some time where it's like, we love Bud, talked about him being a Bucks coach for life after 21 and even 22, but you just can't have that kind of stuff happen.
Was that the universal opinion about last year's playoffs, that things need to change? The Giannis injury didn't add any kind of context. I know Buck added some. I know Buck was going through some personal. Bud was going through some personal stuff as well.
That too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we got some quotes. Bobby Portis and Jay Crowder have been more on the record, and then I think we've heard some kind of other mutterings about just like not enough engagement in the locker room between the coaching staff and the players, specifically after Darvin Ham left to coach LA. And I think when you add that in, as well as kind of the playoff inflexibility and some lack of adjustments and things like that, that's when you just need to, and I don't want to say lose the locker room or, I think Bud's going to come back probably a year or so from now and be a great coach for someone again. I do think he's a great NBA coach. But I think there was just a disconnect and they kind of had lost what they were doing. I think it looked like they were going through the motions in a lot of games last year. And I mean, even those games without Giannis, I mean, if you lose because Giannis doesn't play at all, sure. I think he only totally missed 2 games in that series. And it wasn't just that they lost. I mean, they got owned. I mean, they got slapped around. You can't have that even without a Giannis. I mean, you look at 21, they lost Giannis and they came back and rallied and beat the Hawks. This is a team that had too much talent to go out in 5 in a 1-8 series, even though, Miami went to the finals, but no one cares. They should have at least pushed the series long enough to let Giannis get back. And I think after a series like that, it's really hard to keep everything together. Dame famously did it with the Blazers when they got swept by the Pelicans, but there were less expectations, less stakes. And I mean, you could argue it wasn't the right thing to do because they never really accomplished too much after that, outside of, going to the conference finals and then getting swept by the Warriors. So,
which many have.
Yeah, that's happened to a lot of teams. But yeah,
but still, man, the Miami Heat really did it to everybody. Questioned the inner fabric or stability of the everybody's situation.
They're going to do the same thing. They're setting it up even better this year. They're going to, we were horrible for 3 months and we barely got in, and now you guys suck even worse. That's going to be their line the whole season.
What's going to be wild is they're 1-4 to start the season. They have this weird 1-point win over Detroit on opening night, and then they've looked awful through the first 5 games. And this is all setting up for them to be the 10th seed. They'll sneak in to the play-in. They'll be like a 33-win team, and we're just going to be looking up at the end of the season. It's how did the Heat win 33 games and win the finals this season? That's going to be the path for them. It's funny. The Knicks are the only team that lost to the Heat in the playoffs and didn't make wholesale changes. The Celtics obviously redid their roster. The Bucks obviously redid their roster. I guess the Knicks with the different expectations they have changes things a bit.
Went out and got Donte. It's a pretty big deal.
That's true. Former Buck, Donte DiVincenzo.
Yeah. He called me a clown on Twitter once.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I said he was dribbling like Kevin Hart in the All-Star game. He did not care for that comment. I asked him to come on the pod. He said he was good. And that was that.
Well, it'll be a bit of a homecoming for Donte DiVincenzo on Friday. Speaking of the court, I don't even know if this is a topic we should address.
Oh boy!
Well, just are you a fan of what court the Bucks are gonna have for the play-in tournament, the in-season tournament? The look of it, I haven't seen what the Bucks court looks like. I know Knicks fans hate the Knicks one.
The Bucks one, I think, is better than a lot because I don't know how they won the lottery. They have the normal hardwood look as the accent color, and then the middle is this pretty garish green stripe pastel that kind of matches the trim on their City Edition jersey, which I wonder if they're going to wear because they did announce it today. I would hope they would, because otherwise the green won't match the green, which is a little weird. But I don't hate the idea. I think they just overdid it poorly, but the idea of trying to make it obvious that you're watching a different game, I think is a good idea. But the triple trophies kind of slapped on there, and the extreme, the Pelicans one is an affront to God, some of the extreme colors used. The Knicks one, I think the colors are good enough that it's not a bottom tier one. I don't like the drop shadow on New York, and it's obviously a bit much, but the blue and orange is so clean that I think it'll probably end up working out.
So the court has way too much orange on it. I'm curious what happens when we actually see it, if that changes things. But to your point that you just made about the New York drop shadow for the actual jersey, for the City Edition jersey, we have been begging for that uniform color combination with all blue with the black stripe down the side. So they just released a video. We're recording this Thursday morning, So
I love that you pulled Saturday. Not even close.
I'm looking forward to Saturday is what's going on. It's a day off. So I'm looking forward to Saturday is what happened there, Ty. The point that I'm trying to make is that when we actually saw it, they released a promotional video with Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart wearing the uniforms. And it looks amazing. Like you don't really notice the drop shadow because you're not paying attention. You just see.
That's good.
So I'm wondering if that's going to alleviate some.
That's all of these stuff. That's all this stuff, though. It all looks horrible in the promotional things, and then most of the time you put it on the players, and it's like, oh yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah, that's fine. Like that. I wish they would not even unveil like the flat because they all look worse. Like that. They all look better on the play. They should always unveil it. I mean, I know it's like leaks usually, not the actual announcement, but they got to make sure that what's getting leaked is like, oh, here's a cool player wearing it. I think it automatically makes it cooler, and they just don't look as good flat.
So you're close to my age. So you grew up watching basketball the same time I did. And the Bucks old uniform, the purple with the with the stripe, it was a gray stripe or a green stripe down the side.
I think green.
It was green. Regardless, like the purple jerseys that I remember are iconic. And like anytime then I'm also grew up where the home team wore white except for LA, and then the road team wore their colored uniforms. And it's a different era. Do you miss that at all? The fact that when you're the home whites and the road uniforms?
I do. And I miss those jerseys in particular. And I've apparently, so they did a throwback to them last year. And what we've learned is it's like it has to be a 5-year anniversary for them to do a throwback jersey to a certain year, which seems so weird and arbitrary. Like they already don't have enough good ideas. I don't know why you put that limitation. But my favorite is the purple deer head jerseys, which we have not seen for quite a while now. I think Giannis wore them like once. It was like those purple and green ones, but they had like a full deer head. Brandon Jennings wore it once, but like Ray Allen would wear it. And I really, if they bring those back, I have not purchased a jersey in a while. We may go for a Dame soon. I find it hard to wear them well. I like to put it over a hoodie because I just feel like, I don't know. I'm not going to wear a jersey with no undershirt. Like I'm grown. I'm not hooping. I'm just going to watch someone else. So the t-shirt move is okay, but I prefer the hoodie, which works in Wisconsin. So I don't buy a ton of jerseys, but I probably need a Dame and the purple. I really want a purple deer head whenever they bring those back.
I don't. Well, so I got to be honest, you see the studio I'm recording, and I think the Melo jersey over my right shoulder is the last Knicks jersey that I've bought. I don't know if I need to invest in like a Jalen Brunson or a Randall or even an RJ at this point with how he's played so far this season. But
it's been tough for you guys to buy.
It has been.
It's been a lot easier for you can go press the Giannis button at any time, and it's like that's gonna work well.
Well, so it's the inverse for. Like I'm sure as a Bucks fan and dealing with the speculation of what Giannis is going to do and the national conversation of his future can be tedious, but like you have the certainty that he's there and he's won something there. So there's at least something to buying a Bucks jersey with him. The problem with a Knicks jersey, say you get an Emmanuel Quickley jersey. I have no idea if he's going to be on the team next year. Or Jay Barrett, I have no idea if he's going to be on the team next year. So I have no idea.
Anyone but Brunson, right?
It's literally Jalen Brunson,
the only guy who's not.
Or how about this? Constantly. If you went to Villanova, you could probably still you get your jersey and have some type of security that they're going to be here. So Josh Hart is good. Get a DiVincenzo. Get a Ryan Arcidiacono. Just go ahead and get the Mikal Bridges jersey now in a Knick uniform and custom make it because it's going to happen.
Did you hear what I said about their roster building strategy on the chase down?
Oh no. What is it?
They're just playing hoop grids. It's just Nova on both sides. That's just the Knicks. It's just anything Nova.
No, it's Nova CAA is what.
Yeah, Nova CAA hoop grids. That's Leon Rose building a roster.
Bingo. That's what. Maybe let's see. The craziest thing about Julius's start to the season, it's like, listen, you left the family. You're no longer part of CAA. You left Nike, like Mr. Skechers out here, and this is what the start that you're off to. So 2 questions.
We're way off track, but the third name on the Skechers release being Terrence Mann still kills me. Like, come on, guys, you couldn't have gotten one more.
They're building a brand over there at Skechers. They got to start from somewhere, 2 questions before we get out of here. So I've been asking some kind of evergreen question that gives some insight to how the opposing fan base feels in general, that only the fan base would feel. And I think I've landed on the Mount Rushmore of rivals is what I want to ask first go around, because like the Knicks obviously have some rivals that they circle on the calendar every single time that the schedule is released. And it's like, oh, I can't wait. And honestly, I think the Cavs have started to form that relationship with the Knicks after last year's playoffs, and obviously the Donovan Mitchell connection. For you personally, who are the 4 teams that you go right to the schedule every time that it's released every year? And it's like, all right, when are they playing this team?
So I think Heat and Celtics are the clear top 2.
Makes sense.
And the Celtics one is historic too. Not that, a lot of Bucks fans currently maybe know or care, but there was some really great Bucks teams in the 80s who got derailed by the Sixers and by the Celtics too. By the Celtics, I mean. And then the Sixers, the Sixers are the third one. That's why I was thinking Sixers. And the same deal. Like Dr. J stopped some really great Sidney Moncrief teams. And then obviously, I mean, they're lesser than those two because they never make it far enough in the playoffs, but they've had some great regular season games. And I think that would be a really fun playoff series that Milwaukee wins. So really open to that actually happening. So then I think you get to an interesting point where like the 4th one is probably the toughest. And I'm trying to make sure I'm not just like forgetting someone, but I would imagine it's probably, I mean, like the Nets instantly fell apart. It probably would have been the Nets. No one cares now. No one cares about the Nets ever now. It's just like they're like a scrapyard that people want to pick parts off. That's the only reason anyone talks about the Nets. They've had some nice wins this year. They just beat someone last night. I forget who, but they
beat the Heat last night. That's the fun part.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, speaking of scrapyards. But we already agreed they're going to be a problem in April if they finish 10 or higher. So it is what it is with Miami. Mm-hmm. So it's not the Nets. I think you could say the Suns just because of the finals, but their team is so different now. I'm honestly not sure. Otherwise, I think you could just say the Raptors still. And it's funny because like they usually have no stakes, but they always play the Bucks pretty tough most of the time. They defend Giannis well still because their roster is just like so big and athletic. So I'd probably say the Raptors with like the Suns trailing off. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone, but I mean, you look at all of their postseasons have ended with 3 of those teams, and then everyone just hates Philly. So that's an easy one.
Man, it might just be a local thing for us here that you don't have a single division rival. The teams you play the most. They've been too bad. So again, the Bulls,
people probably there are Bucks fans who would probably say Bulls. There's Bucks fans who would say Bulls just because Chicago and Milwaukee and Wisconsin, I guess, are big sports rivals, and it's fun to beat the Bulls. But I mean, outside of the Honest Baby playoff series where he decked Mike Dunleavy, I mean, they haven't met in the playoffs a bunch. Milwaukee beat them, the year they lost to the Celtics, and it was like a fun, chippy series, but it sucked. Chris got hurt. That was the biggest takeaway from the series. I guess the Bulls are the closest, but I mean, you look at like the Cavs, just pounded the Bucks the whole LeBron era, and it didn't really matter. And if they met in the playoffs now, maybe that would spark up, but they really haven't had a bunch of like important games with those teams.
Yeah, Chase Down said the same thing about the Bucks. Like, maybe a playoff matchup could inspire that, but like the Knicks were the second on their list, on Justin's list after last. Well, so the Warriors end up being 1, because of the 4 years that they spent together. But yeah, I guess. Maybe this is also a cross sport thing. I promise I'm not going to mention baseball to the KFS audience, but like because there's like New York Boston exists in multiple sports as a rivalry, or New York Miami, or New York Philly. Those 3 teams end up being the Knicks rivals to an extent. And look, the Knicks haven't played the Nets in a playoff series since 2004, and there's still Knicks fans that are like, I can't wait for us to play Brooklyn on the schedule. Yeah. Like I cannot wait to play them. And it's never been a rivalry for me. I've not met I said this to Justin, I've never met a Nets fan in real life. Like I know a ton on the internet and they're really good people, but man, it's fascinating to find that I think rivalry doesn't exist for you.
I think part of it is Wisconsin's like the Minnesota being out of conference for basketball and baseball, I think really hurts building because I think the Vikings and the Bears are the 2 biggest Packers ones. But, I think the Wolves should move to the Central if they had 2 West teams. I think that could really get that going. And then the Bulls and Bucks have just alternated when they've been good so much that, like the Bucks were really bad, like in the Jordan era. The Bulls were pretty bad in the 80s. When D Rose and them were there, the Bucks were really bad. And then the Bulls have been pretty damn bad, in the Giannis era. So it's kind of like they've traded off enough that there hasn't been a ton of like huge games between the two. So maybe they could be up there instead of like Toronto. But I think 2019 and just the regular season stuff, I would give the edge to Toronto personally.
Interesting. So last question, and this is when I turn it over to you and ask you, do you have any questions about the Knicks and for me and what their 2 and 3 start to the season and how they got there? Any thoughts about the Knicks or questions about the Knicks so far this year?
I guess my question about the Knicks is, like, are they too dependent on the idea of a star trade, or is that just an outside media thing? Because like they have all the contracts that they could do. They've piled up these picks. They haven't really spent them. Their picks aren't that great, but it's like, do they actually need that? Are they actually gearing toward that? Or is that just something we talk about? Because, you know, as you mentioned early in the pod, like, oh, New York, you bring up the Knicks whenever someone might be available. Like, do they need to swing and pull off an Embiid trade this year? Or is that just a talking point?
Well, so that's the thing. It's which star trade are you talking about? The like they get mentioned with everybody. Like when Jrue Holiday was traded, there was articles. Should the Knicks go all in on, or not even all in, but should the Knicks go get Jrue Holiday? I think Tibbs would love Jrue Holiday. When James Harden was available, should the Knicks go get James Harden, pair him with Jalen Brunson in the backcourt? There was a notion like the Dame Lillard was available for a little bit. Kristaps Porzingis, what a reunion! And I think it's obvious Leon Rose is saving, like he's built a version of a treasure chest. And while you're right, the protected picks aren't great. Like the Knicks have the Bucks protected pick next year. I can't wait for the 27th pick in the draft to come our way next year. While recognizing Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes are 25th. So they can find value. They're good at drafting when they have draft picks. Because the Knicks still have all of their own first round picks available. Still a big chest. Anybody's going to roll the dice on James Dolan picks in the future. That's just a flat out Knicks tax that exists. So they do have a pretty elite trade package for a star if they need to go make it. I just think he's always held out on the right star to go get, which is why I don't think Donovan Mitchell is a Knick right now. I think he recognized the ceiling of that team would not be where it needed to be for the amount of assets he was going to have to give up. Now, as far as the dependence on eventually needing that star, I've mentioned his name a couple times. When your best player or one of your best players is Julius Randle and he plays like he did last season, there's like a second round of the playoffs or at least a 4 or 5 seed ceiling there. And you know, like the guy's made the All-NBA team twice, the All-Star team twice. Like, and I thought deserved both times. When he's, I want to cut in quickly. I agree.
And people laughed at that. I think the first All-NBA or whatever, if he only made one the year after, and isn't that silly now? No, it's not. He was an All-NBA player that year. Yeah. I think trying to retroactively, like, I think it's stupid. Like, you can say he's inconsistent, sure, but that doesn't take away an All-NBA season. I thought he clearly deserved it.
So that's where the playoffs can completely retcon everything you remember from the regular season. Like the shots that he made last year for them to win games are just completely forgotten because of what he was during the playoffs, disregarding for like how hurt he was in those postseason in the postseason and in those playoff games. However, there is a very clear ceiling when he's your second or first best player. And unless RJ Barrett is taking a significant leap, which I'm not going to rule it out, but like he's played really well so far to start the season. And it's a continuation from what he was during the playoffs last year. I just like, he's going to have to get to an all NBA level to then be like, all right, the ceiling still exists. So you wonder if the consistency that comes and having a player that's of the level of a Donovan Mitchell or whomever they're going to potentially get in one of these trades would raise that ceiling to make them more consistent. I think they're the way that they're built right now is on depth, and they're going to see how far it can take them for at least one more season. And if it's a first round exit, if it's the play-in, if it's the second round, I believe they're going to make a pretty all-in move this offseason. We'll see if that all-in player is available when they're ready to make it.
Does Karl Towns excite you?
Not really.
Yeah, I don't think he really does anyone. I just think about like him next to Mitch with Brunson handling. I'm like, that's fun. Well,
so like,
not sure it's fun enough to you know empty. Maybe you don't have to. I don't know.
Like the ideal version of Towns is at center, though, right?
I don't know. I don't know if it matters.
A small ball 5, you'd trust him as a 4?
I guess it depends who you're playing.
That's true. Matchups matter.
Yeah.
Is it an incorrect take to be, well, okay, this version of Julius Randle? No. But is it an incorrect take to be like, I'd rather have Julius Randle? Like,
Probably
I think
not.
you're getting about
Probably
the same.
I think offensively, the spacing, because I think that's probably their biggest issue offensively is like Randle doesn't, like he shoots a bit, but he's not really stretching the floor. And I think, like I'm thinking like, Mitch in the dunker spot or pick and roll. And then, Brunson, Cat, like they'd be a really fun offensive team. But yeah, you do run into like either you're bad at defense with Cat at the 5 or you're, have a big hole on defense with Cat at the 4. I don't know. I think he's going to go somewhere. I think Minnesota is kind of running into a reckoning here. I don't know where, though. That's the interesting thing.
The Knicks, I think, are prime suspect number 1. CAA client, former went to Kentucky, used to play for Tibbs, has already made some public comments.
If he enrolls at Nova to get like a post grad to like finish a degree, that's how you know. That's how you know.
Yeah, there you go.
If we hear Carl Towns taking night classes at Villanova, pen it in.
So you're going to notice this when they play on Friday, but the Knicks, and maybe he started off the season somewhat hesitant to take threes, but Randle per 36 last year, I think 4 players averaged more 3-point attempts per game. So the Knicks recognize they need
to stretch that out.
Ball. Like he needs to be a spacer. So you are correct in that the spacing that a Towns for Randle swap would create. I just think I'd run into the same offensive frustrations from Cat. Defensive frustrations that I had to do with Randle with Cat.
Oh yeah.
That the assets it's going to cost you. I'd rather just like you have Randle now. If you can make an all-in move that makes you a title contender, if that move exists. The name I was circling for a while was Paul George. That because he's a year away from free agency.
Yeah,
and like the defensive anchor that he would be, he could then be your backup for, like, he alleviates any of the stress that you'd have in like, oh well, we have Randle and Brunson on the floor at the same time. Well, you're pairing them with Paul George and Mitchell Robinson and like an Emmanuel Quickley or a Quentin Grimes, then that's a little different. I think the Clippers have made it clear they want to go all in on this 30
for this year. For this year, those guys are extension eligible. They haven't gotten an extension. So
you don't think Ballmer will go into the tax and be like, "Look at my new building with all these stars"?
I would expect them to, but I expected the deals to be done already, right? And they're not. And they're extension eligible at any point because they could be hitting free agency this year. Until I see Paul and Kawhi sign those things, there is a big opportunity for the Clippers to kind of end up with a whole different team next year. And I think Harden, they can't extend. Kawhi and Paul George are expiring. If anyone cares, I think Russ is expiring. It's like whatever. It's not really the same level at this point. But like they're a fascinating team because you're like, yeah, you probably wouldn't lock that in for a couple of years, but they haven't. And I'm just like, are they going to? Are they kind of thinking like maybe we pivot? But then now with this trade, it's like you can't really. So I imagine that we're going to see those extensions at some point this season. But until we do, it's like, man, they could really walk. And I don't know, Philly has all this cap space. Of course, a team like the Knicks could probably do a sign and trade, but then the Clippers tax situation gets interesting. I don't know. It's messy. Bobby Marks will say how it all works in 5 months or whatever. But I just think, to not take too much time, the Clippers' current situation, it makes sense to lock in, but they haven't. And I think that in itself is noteworthy.
Interesting. Now, like the trade happened a couple of days ago, so who knows? If,
this time
they're in the process of it. As you said earlier, it's November 2nd. I think the last thing I'll say, as far as the Knicks are concerned, about like the potential need for a star one day, is there's like this franchise has been starved for homegrown people to root for a long time. Like they made the finals in '99. That was the last time the Knicks made the finals, and the only person on that roster that was drafted by the Knicks was Patrick Ewing. And he didn't play in the finals because he got injured in the conference finals. So there's an attachment to this current Knicks iteration that's like, well, Brunson and Randle are hired guns, and Josh Hart is like a midseason trade that changed the team. Like Mitchell Robinson is a 2nd-round pick they turned into an elite offensive rebounder. RJ Barrett finally coming to his own after struggling as a teenager. when he first got here, and then through most of his first 4 years. Emmanuel Quickley is a revelation out of the 25th pick in the draft. Like Quentin Grimes is a find and has some two-way capabilities with a really high ceiling that any team would want. And the fact
Sims
that
too.
like Jericho Sims, the third to last pick in the draft, and maybe your backup center if he can continue to progress as he has so far. And like Deuce McBride was taken in the second round, that same Sims draft. And he's a rotation player in the NBA somewhere, especially if he learns to hit a jump shot with any kind of consistency. So they have all these fun young players that if you're taking out the championship expectations, they're just a fun, entertaining product to root for. This is New York, and this is also like professional sports. You're eventually going to want to raise a trophy at the end of your season. And I think that's where this is headed. And then maybe we'll do some playoff previews sometime. Ty, we'll actually be able to talk about a playoff series.
I sure hope both teams are in the playoffs based on their respective starts.
That's true. Maybe it's a playing game that we're looking at. And look, I got to be honest. I was like expecting after the Knicks went up 2-1 against the Cavs and they looked very shook last year. I was getting ready to be like, all right, I got to reach out to Ty because the Knicks are going to play the Bucks in the second round. And obviously the Bucks and the Miami Heat had different plans. But we were this close, and maybe we'll get close this season. Ty.
Yeah, I learned you just can't do that stuff. I'm never going to try and ahead of time reach out to anyone. I feel like I talked to the Chase Down guys about, it'll be great. And then look what happened to both teams. Now this year, I'm going to do whoever they are playing in round one when it is final. And then I'm not talking to anyone else from any other team until all series are over.
There you go. I'll text you the morning of game one, and then we'll figure out who's playing who. Ty, it's always great to have you on and to talk about what's going on in the land of the Bucks. I will ask you one non-basketball question, and it's what was your reaction when the Packers' former quarterback went out 4 plays into his new team season? Obviously, you know how I felt.
It was honestly just like pure disbelief. Like I literally was like, that's like not even possible, right? Like that for it to happen like that. But so I'm watching it with Mrs. Eurostep, who is getting into sports, but only through the lens of like off field stuff, which is actually good for the Jets because we watched Hard Knocks. And when you watch Hard Knocks for the first time, you just form an attachment. So she is now rooting for Zach Wilson in all of these games. And she was like really excited. We tuned into the game together, which is like not super common. And then that happens. And I'm kind of scrolling Twitter. I'm like, oh, they think it's his Achilles. He might be like done for the year. She's like, that's not possible. And I was like, unfortunately, it really is. That's sports. And she's like, why do people watch sports? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. We do.
If I could just say something to Mrs. Eurostep, it's not even just that sports. That's the Jets.
Yeah,
like,
I was trying to explain the whole Jets thing. She didn't get it. Yeah, it's hard to explain to someone with no familiarity. But yeah, I was like, this kid's kind of how things go for them.
1999, the year after they went to the AFC title game and lost to John Elway, Terrell Davis, and the Broncos. Right, the 99, both of those, all the Broncos have retired, and this is the Jets' year. Vinny Testaverde tears his Achilles in the second quarter, and the Jets then go 8-8. Guess who did the coin toss for the Aaron Rodgers Achilles game?
Vinny Testaverde.
Wow. Yeah. All the bad karma was there.
Looks like A-Rod's coming back. Zach Wilson's found some
A-Rod.
footing.
Dude, hold on.
That's what Wisconsin people call him. Yeah, A-Rod.
So that's your A-Rod. Oh, my gosh. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, we didn't really have to worry about the other one because the Brewers didn't make the playoffs for like 30 years from 82 to 08. So yeah, it's at least maybe not everyone. My dad though loves the A-Rod name, so that's what I think of him as. That'll
do it. Okay, that's the only baseball I'm talking. I promise, Knicks fans. Ty, tell everybody they can find all of your stuff.
I've been all over the place. I don't know if they're going to want to, but gspn.info has links. We actually have podcasts for all the big 3 sport teams in Wisconsin. So Bucks, Brewers, and Packers. None of them have been all that fun lately, but hey, we're still doing them. We're still enjoying the nitty gritty, and social links and everything are in there too. But it's just at Ti Windisch on x.com or whatever, and IG, and I think Threads too. So I'm out there, but yeah, just a lot of hopefully brighter spirits going forward. Although people listening will hope that, I'm sad for at least another 2 days, and then maybe I can be happy.
I was going to say, on behalf of Knicks fans, we wish you the best of luck this season on every game except for Friday night.
Same to you. Same to you guys.
Ty, always great to talk to you, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.